tonight we've rejigged the running order a little bit. So we're going to start with a news roundup. We're going to start with Bob because he's super keen. News roundup. There's a lot to talk about. Obviously, a huge amount going on. Huge impact of what's coming in Sunak's speech and betrayal. So there's a lot for us to cover, but we'll try and go fairly swiftly. So even though I'm sure we've all got a lot to share, please try and keep your contributions brave. Then we're going to go to Ranty. Mark is going to do his bit because he'd already planned to do a piece on the war on motorists as well. So it's a really good fit. And then we're going into a really interesting talk from Tom Bailey of Street Systems, who's going to talk about a collaboration that he's been doing with Transport for Greater Manchester. Develop cycleway crossing systems for visually impaired people. So Tom's going to do that, and that will be our close. So that's the plan for this evening, and thanks in advance to our speakers who are amazing. And I'm going to kick us off with the news roundup. And so I'm going to go straight to Bob. You've got your hand up. Bob, over to you.
Yeah. Okay, so it's about the plan for drivers. I've tweeted about it. I think you should look at it. You know, frankly, I tweeted that in the last 35 plus years as a transport planner, campaigner, academic, I've never seen anything which is actually so embarrassing. Do look at my Twitter feed for what I said, or if you want me to email you or DM me or whatever. It is, as I say, really embarrassing, and it's different from what Grant Shapps said about active travel. This government probably only has another year to go. The issue for me, there are two issues that come up. The first one is, does it actually cancel what's happened, like with Traffic Management Act 2004? Because there is something at the bottom of that saying this is now not in action. I do not know if that's true or not. So maybe Mark can tell us. The other thing is the lack of response from the Labour Party so far, which is upsetting, because this does need to be binned as soon as possible. Having said that, this plan for drivers doesn't actually have the sort of status of something like a local transport node. It's not actual legislation. So what it actually means, we don't know. I mean, the whole thing is absolutely, and I say this as someone who's used to speaking very politely to ministers and officers and elected politicians. It is actually embarrassing for someone, a junior minister. This was captured by John Dales, if you want to look at his Twitter feed for that, who says that councils are telling people when to go shopping. That kind of non-fact coming out from a minister is actually troubling and disturbing. So anyway, I think the issue is, to what extent is this actually going to impede what is in progress now? Can we get the opposition parties to get their act together, and indeed Conservative politicians? So that, I think, is what needs to be talked about. Thanks.
Thanks, Bob. I'm sure you're not the only one. I'm sure we all share those views. And actually, this is one of those moments where having this amazing forum is pretty critical, even if it's only mass bloody therapy. But we are potentially a really good activist base, and there's some people with amazing networks on the call. Good points all, Bob. And Ruth, over to you.
Well, hello. I just thought I'd drop in something nice in the ongoing saga of Cycleway 9, because the last time I reported, it had been called in by the local Tories, and it was called in and it was duly thrown out, their call in. So we now have permanent Cycleway 9, which is really, really awesome. It's going to be made a bit better fit for purpose, and hopefully Ranty and I can have a conversation about why side road entrances are pretty dangerous in this country, because they're not designed properly such that drivers still do come out of them. But anyway, that's my good news from Chiswick. Our Hounslow councillors have held fast and we have Cycleway 9, so it can work. Thank you.
Ruth, that's absolutely amazingly good to have some good news. I should have shared some good news from Greater Manchester. Actually, I missed my opportunity to say that the B network for Greater Manchester is now fully installed. We have wrested control of our buses back in Greater Manchester. And just yesterday, Andy Burnham said in the face of all the rolling back of things like net zero pledges, we're going to stand firm to our 2038 target. So we've got some leadership in Greater Manchester, which is a good thing. Mark, over to you. Mark Strong.
Thanks. Yeah, I had to read through this piece of rubbish for work because I'm talking about policy on the training I just said. So I had to say that this is updated and policy is updated. No, I think, Bob, I think I'm afraid you're being too optimistic. It has huge impacts. One is, as people put in the chat, the network management duty has been withdrawn, and that's an obligation on local authorities to do things. So there is no longer an obligation on local authorities to do active travel. That doesn't mean they can't, but it just means that the really risk averse ones will be even more risk averse and won't feel there's any need to do anything. And a few of us, Ranty and I and a few other people were talking about this and saying, what will they actually do? And I thought that would be one of the things they've done, and they've done it. But the worst element is point 13, which I had flagged up and thought they won't possibly do that, and they're consulting about doing it, which is removing the powers of the DVLA, removing the powers of local authorities to get driver information from camera enforcement. So at the moment, they're only talking about consulting it rather than just doing it, which is a very, very small blessing. But if that was the case, it doesn't matter how many cameras you have, you can't get the driver data, you can't issue a ticket. And that would be retrospective for everything, including London, and it would be retrospective on all school streets. And Liam Murray's been flagging this up today, actually. So it would affect London, it would affect everything. And that is a massive impact. Bizarrely, and it is, the whole thing is a pile of pants, basically. Bizarrely, that's 13, and further down there's an element about I can't remember. It's 22. Quieter neighbourhoods allow local authorities to roll out noise cameras to target sector vehicle modifications. Noise cameras work on exactly the same basis of the legislation that they would be seeking driver information. So at the one point they're talking about taking away cameras that can give it, and in another point they're talking about granting powers to give it. So it's completely and utterly incoherent, apart from being professionally rubbish.
Thanks, Mark. I think that officially classes as a full-on demolition. So thanks for that. I'm going to come to you, Robin, next.
Okay, I'll start with the incoherence that somebody pointed out to me of the driver in the picture in the forward isn't wearing a seatbelt, which shows the incompetence with which it is put together. I was wondering, based on a chat we were I think somebody here was involved in on a different WhatsApp group, whether it's worth putting together a freedom of information request on the impact on traffic and congestion levels and on the decarbonisation plan. I'm not quite sure exactly how to word it, and if anyone is more competent to put it together and know where to send it to, volunteers welcome. But that might be worth doing. The other thing I thought I would share with you, and I'll do it in the chat, so it's only for people who are present here, is a response from one of our local councillors, cabinet members actually. Oh, I can't get it to work. Yeah, to one of our local campaign group members and residents on the plan for motorists, which you can read in the chat. He's a Liberal Democrat, and he takes the mention of Oxford in the plan for motorists as a credit, and plans to carry on. So hopefully that's good news.
Thanks, Robin. Yeah, definitely good news. And if anybody in the chat wants to offer up their FOI expertise and pick up Robin's challenge, please do. Ian from Bristol, do you want to come in?
Thanks, Steve. Hi, afternoon, everybody. Yeah, it's just a quick piece of news. Bristol Cycling Campaign, in conjunction with Cycling UK, are organising a Mode Shift Transport Summit, a one-day conference on the 18th, Saturday the 18th of November. And it might be of interest particularly to people in the Southwest region. We've got a range of speakers coming in to speak on that day, and some workshops on various topics around mode shift and just transition. And yeah, just what I'll do, I'll put the Eventbrite page in the chat if anyone wants to follow and read a little bit more about that. The rationale for this is there is a local council election next May in Bristol, and we want to stimulate a debate. And Cycling UK, I think their interest is running this as a little bit of a test bed for something they might want to do regionally in other areas in the future. They're providing some funds to help us set up the day. Anyway, I'll put it in the chat. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Ian. Brilliant stuff. Really, really good. And next, going to come to Paul in Cardiff. Paul.
Evening all. Like Ruth, just something nice to pass on. It's the 10th anniversary this week of the Active Travel Act passing into legislation here in Wales. So we're in celebratory mood. So we've got lots of stuff going on tomorrow. We've got a cycle ride. We've got a walk. We've got talks on the steps of the Senate. We've got panel discussions. We've got workshops. We've got stalls. We're even letting Chris Boardman in over the border to help us celebrate. Looking forward to that.
Paul, that's brilliant. That's really lovely. I can see smiles on everybody's face. Well, some faces. Other. That's really good news. I think we're all going to come and relocate to Wales if that's all right. Tim, over to you in Leicester.
Oh, hi, everybody. We held a Safer Streets Now protest on Saturday morning. Enormous turnout of 12 of us, but it did include 2 deputy mayors from Leicester City Council, both of whom are off to the Labour conference later this week, and both of whom are going to have a word with Lou Hay about her absolutely pathetic tweet in response to Sunak's plan for drivers, which was, look at the price of petrol. Yeah, that was really good. And we had a fantastically diverse Kiddical Mass, our first Kiddical Mass organised by a young woman on Sunday, and I need to learn how to blur out people's faces who signed a ticket list that says, I don't want to be photographed or in your video, but then wave at me as they go past the camera. So mixed weekend. Just on the plan for drivers, Sally tweeted it last night, so I sat here reading it, and there's a marvellous thing about cracking down on centre lane hoggers on motorways. And I thought, that rings a bell. And sure enough, it does. So there's 2004, there was a centre lane hogger thing that didn't work. And then there was another one in 2010. So it was drivel. And the other bit, it was based on a piece of research done by an insurance company of the things that drivers hate other drivers doing. And you think, that'll be 30 people under a direct line, bit of staff. Proper research. Love it.
Thanks, Tim. You're almost definitely right. On the using a survey to create a PR hook is classic tactic. Right, we're almost there, and then I'm going to go over to Ranty. Wookie in Cambridge, you want to come in?
Yeah, I was just quickly to say, for anyone who doesn't know, the Cambridge Sustainable Transport Zone is officially dead this week after the I think some of the Lib Dems got cold feet and gave up, and then some Labour people did. So the whole thing is definitely not going ahead. So we're all wondering what the hell's going to happen next. But that's been a fine example of how not to introduce what was a very radical scheme. It was pretty ambitious. It was too ambitious and generated a great deal of very organised opposition now. So we'll have to deal with that. And and the cycle campaign is generally seems to be considered equivalent to the people whose terrible idea this was. So we've lost a certain amount of public support in the process of going, well, it was a better plan than nothing, so we should support it. But anyway, that's not gone too well.
Although I must challenge Wookie slightly on that. We may have been, CamCycle may have had some degree of association with this, but support's actually going up. Wookie, our membership continues to rise. Many people are joining our organisation because of what's going on with that campaign.
Excellent. So, well, yes. I was going to say, if Roxanne's here, she could give a much better state of play.
Yes. And also while this was a very ambitious scheme, it was actually one of the probably most supported schemes of this nature that we've seen in terms of the consultation. And then the revised scheme that was being been put forward in the latest round was actually a great response to the consultation in terms of compromise. And it just never actually got its opportunity to go through. I think it would have got through the next few levels of local authority committees had it not been for a candidate for the general election performing a little bit of a coup in one particular region of Cambridgeshire. So it's quite complex, but the councillors who had to vote on this were actually going to vote on it, I think, at least to get it through a few more rounds. But someone from outside of that body is the one that kind of scuppered it. Anyway, I think a real analysis will need to come at some point. But sorry, Wookie, didn't mean to jump in there, but wanted to say support is going up.
I'm going to guillotine
You're the expert,
Cambridge.
so I'm glad you plugged in. You have a much better overview of this than I do. I just thought someone should mention it.
No, thanks, Wookie, and thanks, Roxy. And it's not that this is a war, Mum, it's a culture war at least, but we can't lose Cambridge. Stay strong, people. Right, last one, and then we're going to go to Ranty. Swami, I hope I've got your name right.
Yes. Hi, everyone. Yes, you got it right. I'm a cycling instructor, so I'm changing the good news bit here ever so slightly, but we are on the same theme, I believe. I'm also the chair of the cycling instructors branch of the IWGB union, and just recently in London we launched a campaign for better pay and conditions. So I'm pleased to say that Camden Council has provided an offer of improved pay and conditions, and then soon followed by Islington Council, and now Hammersmith Council is also doing that. We're in conversation with all other local authorities that actually want to talk to us. So it's moving slowly, but it's moving the right direction. And I'm pleased to say that 25% pay rise, the first significant pay rise in 14 years for cycling instructors in London, has been just won by the union. And obviously we are working hard with the Bikeability Trust, with Active Travel England, with the Department for Transport and TfL and all the local authorities to improve working conditions and pay to all instructors, because we understand the importance of the role that instructors can play in achieving everything that you guys have been talking about. So yeah, just wanted to share the good news.
Brilliant. So, I mean, that is really good news, and all power to you. Amazing stuff. So that's really great news roundup. Thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to hand over now to Ranty, and I'm actually going to also hand over hosting in a moment to Sally, because I'm here at a Tory Party conference fringe event and I should be downstairs. So Sally, after Mark's gone, Sally will be picking up the chair. So thanks, everybody. Mark, over to you.
Great. Could somebody confirm you can see the screen?
All good.
All good. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you very much. Right, let's crack on then. Yeah, I was kind of thinking, what should I write about for tonight? And then unfortunately the news kind of presented itself. But actually, there is some good news here, and it'll be quite a depressing run through some photos of various things. But if I forget, please remind me to give you the good news at the end of this. So we have a war on drivers. It's unbelievable. So Sunak, writing in the Rag, said that he's slamming the brakes on the war on motorists. So that's kind of, yeah, a short week in politics, actually. This is only a couple of days ago. And there he is posing in a situation he's probably never found himself before in his life. So let's look at this war on the drivers, which has been raging for 100 years, give or take, in the UK. Here's a nice layout from the 1980s, where drivers have been treated very, very badly, being told to just think about cyclists crossing just in front of them as they come blasting up onto the M25 slip road. Absolutely shocking war on drivers here. A12 in Wanstead, as it was threaded through communities that were knocked down through Leytonstone in the 90s, I think, if I've got that right. Absolutely terrible. War on drivers here. Look at all that fantastic space that pedestrians have been given there. It's absolutely fantastic. Heading a bit further, and Walthamstow Claxton here proper, over on the marshes. Absolutely terrible war on the drivers here. Cyclists given absolutely fantastic facilities here. Brilliant for people who are 6 foot tall like myself. No problem at all with this. Absolutely terrible war on the drivers going on here. And then we head back to London, outside of London, near where I am. So this is Upminster Bell Corner. This has been like this for probably best part of, since the 60s, with little tweak signals added and all the rest of it. Absolutely terrible for drivers. We've given them left turning slip roads. We've given them lots of traffic lanes. We've squeezed the pedestrians out the way within guardrail. But what a war on drivers we've got here. Let's hop over to Winchester and the Ring Road, Friars Gate, around the city centre. Absolutely terrible. Massive war on the drivers here. The whole Ring Road in some cases, historic streets have been knocked down to wage this war on drivers. On the right-hand side, you can see this car park here. Absolutely terrible. And of course, the people that arrive in car, they absolutely don't become pedestrians and cross the road here. Now we're up into Crawley in West Sussex, and some will recognise this as the cycle catcher. So as you get to have fun on the high street, mixing with the gyratory traffic, you're invited to position yourself as a cyclist just because we have to get in the way of the drivers here into this little catcher. Absolutely terrible war on the drivers here in Crawley. There were some ideas to try and improve this, actually, that I looked at and also PJ looked at. Mark Strong will remember this in the site visit we had. Terrible war on the drivers there. We just had to leave it alone. Over to Basildon in Essex. This is just off the A13 junction. Absolutely horrific war on the drivers here. So if you're driving in the lane nearest to us and turning left, you're given a free flow left turn here. You don't even have to slow down. Absolutely shocking that we're not causing wear and tear on your gas pedal. For pedestrians, fantastic piece of infrastructure here. Not only do you get to go across this free flow lane, you get to go across another lane going in the same direction before the little island on the traffic coming the other way. Terrible, terrible war on drivers. Eastern Avenue down the road from me in Romford. Just an absolutely terrible war on drivers, constantly getting these lovely, beautiful, smooth surfaces, whilst at the same time we're treating people who walk and cycle with little representations of the moon. Fantastic facilities there for those not driving. Terrible, terrible surfacing there for the drivers. War on drivers every single time. Canterbury, this is the Canterbury Ring Road. Lots of thoughts about one of those evil 20-minute cities or 15-minute cities or LTNs or whatever, but we just couldn't do it because we would have destroyed the rural charm, the medieval charm of Pin Hill. I mean, you can see the little lines on the right-hand side there, the speed camera tail marks. Absolutely terrible war on drivers. There's absolutely no way that this layout enables people to speed. Absolutely terrible. Up into Huntingdonshire, Brampton, just outside, Buckton Road, absolutely typical war on drivers here. Nice flare into the roundabout, so you don't have to take your foot off the gas. 2 lanes, because it might be a bit busy over in the distance there. And for people walking, cycling, it's fine, it's world class. The Dutch are crying into their milk over how good this is. Hop back over to Essex, and this is a fantastic facility for walking here, as you just walk between a couple of places. Great for side-by-side walking. It's fully accessible to everybody. Absolutely brilliant. But of course, the expense of that is all this squeeze space here for drivers. Really hard for people to maintain two-way traffic. Back over to a bit further from my neck of the woods, but this is Wellbone Lane North in Marks Gate. This junction is pretty much 100 years old. So it's 100 years of treating the drive so poorly. We've tried a roundabout there, that didn't work. We've rebuilt the junction, put in multiple lanes. We cleared the cyclists out. Well, there's absolutely no way people should be crossing the road there. But twice a day, it's absolutely stuffed. So terrible war on the drivers. We just haven't given them enough space on the road there. Frinton-on-Sea, beautiful front there, looking out into the North Sea. But the only way we can make this historic town better is to have parking absolutely everywhere we can think of. There isn't enough parking there, clearly. There's an absolute terrible war on drivers. QE2 Bridge down in Thurrock between Dartford and Essex, Kent and Essex. It's so bad for drivers there. Just to keep the pesky cyclists out of the way, we make people book in by phone to get onto the back of a truck through there. Not at peak times, because we'll upset the drivers sending an extra Land Rover through once in a while. Tried a tunnel, didn't work. Built a second tunnel, that didn't work, so we built the bridge. We still charge for it, and that's terrible for the poor drivers of Essex and Kent. We probably need to build another crossing a bit lower down the Thames, maybe, because we never spent any money on drivers in the UK. Let's head over to Dagenham. So this is absolutely shocking scenes. Again, it's what you see twice a day. We just haven't knocked enough down in Dagenham. Unfortunately, the dual carriageways that have been built absolutely everywhere in the town haven't quite got as far as Oxo Lane. You know, pesky bus stop there. We've got footway parking there. We probably could have taken that all for extra driving. Terrible war on drivers here. Back over to Romford, my neck of the woods again. You know, we really need to make old people cross or what have been designed as fairly high speed roads. We don't need drop curbs. We don't need to maintain that desire line, because if we did, then we'd have to slow drivers down on the ring road here. Absolutely shocking scenes from the 80s. Over to Cambridge. You know, we don't really need footways in Cambridge because everybody cycles there. Nobody drives at all in Cambridge, so let's just get rid of the footways and have parking there, because if we didn't, we'd have to actually give people some safe walking space, and as we know, that would be a war on the drivers. And let's head back over to Essex. So Pier Avenue in Clacton-on-Sea, one of the forgotten towns of England. Obviously, it's the town that the traffic engineers also forgot, because it's just not enough capacity here. We haven't designed it enough to stuff the traffic through as quickly as we can. Maybe we should take those red lights out just to make things a bit easier for those poor drivers. And let's go to Bury St Edmunds, lovely market town. Unfortunately, there's just not enough parking. So we've made the prime market square a car park. If you want to get there by train, you have to go outside the town and walk up. We couldn't have anyone driving a long distance here. We have to let them into the middle of the town centre there. And let's finish, I think this is my last one, with one of my favourites, where we've really worked hard to create this massively brilliant public realm car park. Rat Run as well. Probably not enough capacity here, but it's quite pretty. When you're sat in traffic on the bus or in your taxi, you get to look at these wonderful buildings and this really, really expensively paved surface. It's not right that some drivers feel under attack. This is our so-called Secretary of State for Transport speaking just a couple of days after Sunak, pulling all the conspiracies into his speech, with his colleagues trying to row back. Now, I did promise you some good news. Now, the photos I've shown you, it took me a few hours to scrape those from my personal stash and my Twitter feed, because actually, when I have gone around the country visiting stuff, most of the stuff in my photo file is absolutely brilliant. It's showing that actually we can do stuff, we can change stuff, we can turn the clock back. So, bit of a navel gaze this evening, but you know, we can change things. Things aren't set in stone, and politicians aren't forever. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, that's a good reminder of how much more there is to do. Yeah, has anybody got any questions or comments on what can he?
Everyone's stunned.
Everyone's stunned.
Under the beauty of Bury St Edmunds.
Yeah. Will, you got a hand up?
Thank you. And I realise I'm going to be preaching to the converted here, but I saw an article that the Transport Research Laboratory put up a week or so ago about language around war on motorists, and I think it's really worth a read. I'll stick the link in the chat. Just saying how wrong talking about this as war is. So I think that I just want to share that, because I think it's something that we and I think we can our side, if you like, can come out of this a lot better than if we're careful about our language. Appreciate, Mark, you're totally tongue in cheek in that bit, but yeah, more generally, sort of when we're talking about this, to not use it as war, because it's not war. That's what's happening in Ukraine, and this is the impact on drivers is not that, is it?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I'll stick the link in the chat. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That would be great. Thank you very much, Mark. I think we're going to move on to our next speaker now, because I'm just conscious that we've got a lot to pack in this evening. Oh, hang on. Before we do, I can see one more hand up. John Parkin, did you have a question?
Okay, I'll be really brief because you want to move on. Sorry, but I think the challenge is, of course, that it's following on from what Will has said. there are 30 actions in the plan for drivers, and I have to say some are not unreasonable. Some are downright egregious, some are really ugly, and some are really concerning. But our challenge is to, as it were, we're the ones who've got to. It's like if it were a war, we're walking through a minefield, and we've got to work out, what will explode in our face, and what to challenge, and what to just call plain stupid and comical, and kind of dismiss it in different terms. And it's really, really challenging. So yeah, thank you for the heads up on how we might use language. I'm struggling at the moment to come up with a language to begin to respond to it, because it's all over the place. It's weird. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah, and I think that's a good observation. I think what I've seen is many people who would normally just bite their tongue not biting their tongues, because it is so kind of, parts of it are so outrageous. And yeah, I think over time it's going to be about how to respond to that in a kind of calm and kind of coherent way, with a sort of much better, more positive, what do we really want, how do we communicate that, and what are our opposition parties doing, I think, as well. There's got to be a bit of scrutiny on there. Right, Tom, so I'm really delighted to have Tom Bailey here talking about bus stop bypasses tonight. I heard him talk at the Active County Conference on this subject, and he's been working with Transport for Greater Manchester on developing a cycleway crossing system for visually impaired people. And I think it'd be something we've talked about a little bit in sessions kind of way back, and I think it'd be really interesting for people to see the progress that he's made with it. So on that note, Tom, I'll hand over to you if you want to share your slides. Oh, and I was just going to say, if you can put questions for Tom in the chat, and if you can put question in capitals in front of your question, just because we're quite pressed for time tonight, I will that way I'll be able to pick up questions and put them straight to Tom, and then if there's time at the end, we can have a little bit of discussion. But that would be great. Thank you. Right, over to you, Tom.
Hey everyone, I'm Tom Bailey. I work with a company called Street Systems up in Newcastle, and I suppose I've kind of starting with a deliberately sort of emotive slide, partly just so I'll see if I can click on to the next one. Yeah, but yeah, I suppose we've been involved in looking at bus stop bypasses for about the last 3 years, and you could argue in a way this actually kicked off the year before, chatting to Brian Deegan at Velocity in Dublin about some of the problems that Manchester were experiencing. In 2020, we got some money from the Department for Transport, from their kind of technology research side, to sort of look at, are there technical solutions which could help in this? Since 2021, we've been working with TFGM on work that's sort of still ongoing there. Trialing equipment on Oxford Road. Last year we did some of the data collection for a Living Streets study funded by Transport Scotland and DFT, which is looking at all of this. There's an enormous layer of work that they've then done on top of that. And I suppose, and then more recently, we've now been commissioned by the National Transport Authority over in Ireland to deliver what is, essentially a very close copy to what we've been doing in Manchester, alongside other solutions which they're investigating. But I suppose in all of this, I've got to stress, what I'm saying is my opinion. It's not the opinion of all these other bodies. In particular, I don't want to kind of prejudge anything that Living Streets say on this. Another groups of people that I'm not speaking on behalf of, we're obviously all the way through this, we've been involved very heavily with stakeholder groups involving visually impaired people, through to even just a couple of weeks back over in Ireland. But in the end, if you want to hear what visually impaired people experience at bus stop bypasses, speak to them rather than me. What I'm not covering this evening is kind of bus stop bypasses where there's motor traffic. on the gap between the bus stop and the footway, as you can see on the left there. Certainly worthy of investigation, but we've not really looked at that seriously. Also, not covering bus stop borders, where there's there's been research done on that, but there's very different behaviour that is observed in those sort of situations. So what we are looking at is essentially situations where the getting off the bus and crossing the cycle track are two separate acts. Is the best way to define it, really. Highways, people, authorities, bodies, tend to have very varied views on to what extent bus stop bypasses do present a problem for people with visual impairment. At the left-hand end of the scale here, I've spoken to some people working for UK authorities who honestly don't see that there's any kind of problem at all. At the other extreme, you've got the Canadians who ended up in court over this. You've got the Irish who are, funding trials of several different types of solutions. Traffic in Ireland tends to draw not only from UK practice, but from European practice and North American practice. So I think possibly the fact that they are more sort of open to ideas from outside does affect their views on this. And then there's a lot of people in the UK who are somewhere in the middle, really, where they kind of do recognise there's a lot of challenges, but they're not really actively trying to do anything about it. This is really, I suppose, my take on things in 4 bullet points, which I'll hopefully be able to evidence to some extent as we go through. But I think there's very little evidence that for people without disabilities that there's any significant problem here. I think I would say there are significant issues for visually impaired people around this type of infrastructure, and often there's design issues in terms of what we see on street that makes things worse. And I think it's worth being aware of that, because sometimes, when you're hearing about problems with a particular site, there are things that make that site worse than others. And then there's also a scarcity of solutions here, which is why we got involved originally, and a very wide variety of contexts where also there may actually be different solutions that are applicable to different contexts. For people without disabilities, I'm suggesting that there is not a problem, and I suppose this photo, which I've borrowed from someone else, kind of illustrates that quite well. Often, particularly at quieter times of the day, pedestrians will walk all over cycle tracks at bus stops, and there's not fear in people's eyes here over this type of infrastructure. When you look at this using the sort of techniques that we use in terms of analysis of video footage, all of these green lines are sort of individual pedestrian paths, and you can see that this location in Manchester, people are not focused on the zebra crossing. If this bus stop bypass sort of held terror for pedestrians, this is the heat map version of the same thing, you would see a very heavy concentration of movement at the formal crossing. But the fact is you don't. For most people, this does not represent a significant barrier. And we see that again and again and again in terms of the patterns of movement that we observe around these locations. But, and this is kind of the big but, this is the behaviour that we observed in Manchester. And I stress here that when we talk about cyclists giving way at these crossings, we did not factor in cyclists slowing down to prevent that interaction, which some other studies have done. But we found very, very low levels of cyclists yielding to pedestrians at these crossings, very high levels of pedestrians giving way to cyclists, despite the fact that this is, formal crossings with Felicia beacons and bells and whistles and everything you might want. And I suppose what you've got to ask yourself is, if you're a visually impaired person, to what extent is the zebra any use to you if only 5% of cyclists are yielding at it? And that's, something that if you want to understand why there is some kickback on this, these numbers hopefully explain that a bit. there was a study done by TRL back in 2018, completely different methodology. You wouldn't expect their numbers to match ours, and we very definitely weren't trying to replicate their study. But I suppose the key thing is that you know, pedestrians giving way, which is the green bars on the chart on the left, that is the predominant behaviour, whether there's a formal crossing or a zebra, formal sort of zebra crossing or an informal crossing point. Pedestrians are tending to give way, cyclists are not tending to give way. And I suppose what you've got to ask yourself there is that, you know, what proportion of people, of cyclists yielding, would make it work if you can't see the bikes? And I suppose that's the crux of this, really. You know, if in a way, if compliance at these crossings is low, and if realistically there is no way of improving compliance at these crossings, and I think that both of those I would suggest are true, then how do you get to a point where this works well for someone who can't see the bikes? And that I think is the key question to be asking. When you look at design of bus stop bypasses, though, I think you can see issues that are potentially making this worse. This is one of our two crossings in Manchester. You know, busiest cycleway in Manchester, Eye Hospital on the left, busy bus stops on the right. This is the view of a cyclist approaching that, and you just look at the amount of kind of visual clutter that you're dealing with on the approach to this crossing, some of which is intended to slow cyclists down. But in this particular location, the problem wasn't actually speed. And I suppose given that cyclists tend to be grouped on the approach to these crossings in particular, but often on cycle tracks, people are grouped by traffic signals further upstream. If you're approaching this crossing, you've got to be trying to watch for someone who might or might not be looking to use this zebra. You've got to be aware of the cyclists around you, and then you've got fairly unforgiving 90-degree curbs either side of you in what is quite a narrow environment. And I think often people who are riding bikes here may well feel that they can't stop, even if they do see someone wanting to cross ahead. This is the crossing on the other side, you know, not quite as cluttered as the Eye Hospital side, but you know, similar kind of dynamic in place. You know, there's no escape room if you get this wrong. You're either gonna hit another bike or hit the curb if you've not judged this perfectly, which I think potentially explains, you know, why cyclist behaviour quite possibly is worse in this location than it was at the TRL sites in London. Another thing to observe here is if you're a visually impaired person, how on earth do you find this crossing if you arrive at this bus stop? And you know, in general, you know, tactile arrangements of these sites are often not ideal. We're not using guidance tactile on bus stops, and perhaps we should be. So I think, you know, there are other things that can be looked at on these sites rather than just improving the crossing facilities. In terms of technical solutions that have been tried or are being tried, essentially, you know, signals are being tried in some places. I think Mark talked a few months back about the use of signals in Cardiff. South Dublin County Council have done the same. But there's a whole set of solutions which have been trialled or are in place, which are essentially a zebra crossing with a push button and some form of audio or tactile messaging to the pedestrian. So I think there's another stream alongside the option of signals. There's another stream of potential solutions which are being experimented on, you know, which aren't necessarily mutually exclusive. There's no reason why you couldn't, for example, add Canadian-style flashing lights to, you know, a UK pilot other than the traffic sign regulations, which is one of the issues we've got. This is what you see in Canada. So the zebra crossing with a push button. This is one of John Dale's holiday photos is the best way to describe it. And the Canadian state of Victoria got taken to court over bus stop bypasses. This is their response to that, which essentially is just a push button that activates some flashing lights. And there's a solar powered version as well as a mains powered version of this. And essentially it's just trying to give someone the ability to signal that they're about to cross.
Yellow lights are flashing. Cross with caution. Vehicles may not stop. Yellow lights are flashing. Cross with caution. Vehicles may not stop. Yellow lights are flashing. Cross with caution. Vehicles may not stop. Yellow lights are flashing. Cross with caution. Vehicles may not stop.
In South Dublin,
All right, Tom, we couldn't hear you while you were talking over that video, just so you know.
Ah, right, okay. Well, apologies for that, but effectively the messaging it's giving is essentially lights are flashing, but vehicles may not stop. So I'll draw your own conclusions on that. In South Dublin, there's this, which is, you know, a set of quite complicated full-scale traffic signals. One of the other Irish local authorities I was talking to was wanting to try traffic lights that defaulted to red for cyclists and had a constant pedestrian green, and then were just triggered on approach. There's all sorts of reasons why what we're looking at here may not be a great idea. I think, you know, giving cyclists a green signal aspect through an area which is very dominated by pedestrians is questionable. To be fair to South Dublin, I think this is a stopgap, and what they're actually looking to move on to is what I'm showing next, and this is from the draft cycling infrastructure design guide, and you've even got Dublin City Council doing what looks like fitting the sockets and the ducting to support this, even though it's not actually, the regulations aren't in place to allow it to actually be built yet. And what they're doing essentially is it's a zebra crossing with a push button, and it has amber or red cycle aspects. So effectively, you put its permanent condition is amber, so it's got the advantage of you not showing cyclists a green, but you then introduce a red when someone feels they need to do that. Manchester. So what we're doing here is we've fitted traffic centre equipment on the Belisha beacons, which happen to be there just because of the era that this dates from. And we're looking at a 30-metre approach zone on the way towards these zebra crossings. We're actually also looking in the other direction as well, because there's enough contraflow going on here that we need to. And what we're aiming to do is essentially look at the cycle flow and derive the optimum point where someone could assert their priority on these zebras. These cycleways on Oxford Road, there's bags of headway between cyclists in either direction. You know, on this side it's the rush hour peaks, the evening, heading away from town. I think this is actually the other side of the road to what was pictured. But you know, even at peak times, you've still got, you know, plenty of large sort of headway gaps between cyclists where it's very easy to cross. But the difficulty is that people can't, you know, visually impaired people can't spot those gaps. So what we proposed to Manchester was essentially that we put something in along these lines where we detect cyclists on approach, and then we have some form of communications device on the Belisha which transmits information to someone who's visually impaired. So effectively, we're kind of back to the same solutions that have been trialled in Canada and in Ireland, where it's a zebra with a push button. But the more sophisticated approach is we're actually looking for gaps. Again, this is just what it looks like looking from the other direction. So it's sort of, it's very much a retrofit. The downside of this is it needs mains electrical power. And if anyone is familiar with the highway and you know how you go about things, having to mains power devices, you know, is a constraint and is a cost. We've got push buttons. We were originally aiming to use kind of standard UK push button designs. One of the bits of feedback we have from Department for Transport is that, you know, if they're gonna let us try this, and it's still an if, they would prefer, you know, something that doesn't look like a signalised crossing design. So these are essentially a UK style rotating cone on the back of a non-standard push button unit. We've not got as far as trialling this on the highway, but we have trialled it off highway on one of the guided busways outside Manchester. So bottom left, you're looking at a kind of trial user group here, including lots of people with various types of visual impairment. Top right, you've got what the equipment sees in terms of this sort of 35-metre deep approach zone. And then the log from the system is sort of shown centrally when someone hits the button. You know, but essentially it's a very simple device, you know, in terms of how the user experiences it. For most people, because mostly cycleways are not actually full of cyclists, you push the button, you get immediate feedback that now is actually a superb moment to exert your priority over crossing, and off you go. It would be quite unusual for that not to happen. And you know, the system will continuously monitor the approach zone. If a cyclist arrives, it will cancel the signal, but it's calibrated so that people have still got time to get across. So hopefully we will get the okay relatively soon to actually push ahead and install those buttons on the street. That said, I think this is going to be a very gradual, cautious process. So we might get them up for a day next, but we probably aren't going to arrive very quickly at a situation where those are there for a more extended trial. So I suppose just coming back to kind of my take on this, which I suppose is sort of up for discussion really. You know, I'm suggesting that there's little or no problem for people without disabilities, because people's behaviour indicates that in terms of what we actually see. You know, there has been questionnaire-based work done by TRL, which leans towards the same conclusion. You know, for visually impaired people, again, you know, I'm suggesting there are significant issues, which I know not everyone necessarily wants to hear, but that's what people are saying. And it's what the cyclist behaviour at these zebra crossings is not amazing, frankly. But then I think we need to not lose track of wider design issues. You know, one of the things we could potentially be doing is providing level surfaces on the approach to crossings, just to allow for a bit more forgiveness. And then we've got regulatory issues. You know, ideally we would have wanted to have been trialling in Manchester something that had some sort of feedback to cyclists, that the system was operating. But it's quite difficult to do that under UK regulations. You know, you can't fit Canadian flashing lights here as much as you know, even if you thought that might be a good idea. So I'll finish up there. Happy to take some questions.
Thank you, Tom. That was fantastic. Yeah, I mean, there's a few questions in the chat which I'll pick up on. But I was just wondering, because I think you were showing that it's possible that you can press a button and it'll basically say proceed with caution. I guess, I mean, is that what you would envisage? I guess it's what's that messaging around, you know, how you manage that to kind of, you've got to say something it's got to be quite.
Well, I mean, I suppose the proceed with caution is what they've implemented in Canada. And it is in particular there where there's no attempt being made to detect if there's a cyclist approaching or not. It's kind of completely mixed messaging in that you're, you know, as I said, cross but don't cross. In a UK context, you know, the experiment in Manchester, I think when we first get it out on the street, it will only have tactile communication with it. You know, we've trialed it with kind of audible signals similar to a normal pedestrian crossing, but there's a bit of concern that gets mistaken for other stuff. There's no reason why we couldn't have a voice message You know, but that can be a bit complicated. And as you say, what are you saying? I mean, and I think what I'm saying is you know, now's a great time to use this zebra. Is the message that we're trying to communicate, which isn't quite the same as what people are used to on street.
Yeah, and I guess presumably if you're in areas where you've got really high levels of cyclists, that's more difficult.
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, it gets more difficult the higher the levels of cyclists. You could argue that there are many locations where levels of cycling are so low that doing anything with technology is overkill. But you know, but obviously that's for other people to argue out. Manchester, Oxford Road is the busiest cycleway in Greater Manchester, and we know it will work there. You know, we've looked at data from London that we've got access to from various survey work that we've done, and it gets most difficult on kind of very busy two-way cycle tracks where you're having to look in both directions and find the gap. But that said, that reflects able-bodied people's experience as well. You know, people who are not visually impaired have to look in both directions and judge for the gap. You know, so it gets more difficult. There's an increased chance someone might have to wait for a bit until that gap appears. But people are quite used to waiting at signalised pedestrian crossings, which for some of the users might well be the only other viable option there.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to take a few questions from the chat. Right, let me find. I've got loads of questions now. Mark Strong has asked if you'd looked at casualty stats of bus passengers on buses. And he's just, hang on, let me just, I'll find the comment now. Sorry. Yeah, maybe you could respond to that while I look for the other question.
I mean, I suppose that I've personally not looked at any casualty statistics relating to this. I've looked at we've done analysis of what interactions occur and how much stress and friction is involved in those interactions. But again, those tend to be very low as well. And I think what we're dealing with here for people with visual impairment is it's a real and perceived barrier. You know, if again it comes back to if you can't see the bikes, it doesn't matter how big the gap is or how rare and unusual and extreme it would be for someone to be struck by a bike. It's how do you step out when you've got no idea whether there's anyone coming or not, and you know full well that very few people will yield to you on the zebra. So that's the issue, I think, rather than, you know, these locations are not statistically dangerous.
Yeah, it's about people giving people confidence, and it being and I guess and its consistency, isn't it? Somebody has asked. Somebody says, great presentation, Tom. Are you aware of the work that Living Streets has been doing, looking at bus stop bypasses?
So yeah, basically I'm not sure if I made that clear enough earlier. We actually did the video collection work for that Living Streets study, and we did a basic level analysis in terms of speeds and volumes and this sort of thing. And obviously doing that work informs my view on this sort of stuff. But then on top of that, Living Streets have done a vast amount of work watching the video and, you know, quantifying lots of different typologies of location as well. You know, so we're hopefully that will be published soon, and I'm looking forward to it as much as other people are. And I don't have any insight in terms of what that's going to say.
Yeah, and I think it will be really interesting to see that. And on a sort of related note, John Parkins asks, sorry if I missed it, but what work did you do directly with visually impaired people in the research? So I don't know if you want to really quickly kind of go over
Yeah,
that?
so I suppose, I mean, with our work, we've always been in a situation of you know, putting forward a technological solution to this, and asking people, you know, you know, what's your experience? Does this meet your requirements? Could this possibly help? You know, how would you react to it? You know, how would you, if you're going to get communication that there's a gap in traffic, you know, how would you like to receive that information? So we've had a very extensive dialogue, you know, right back to a group in Newcastle in 2020, and then Manchester, and then more recently in Ireland. But although we've very definitely offered people a chance to talk about their experiences very generally, we've not attempted to kind of, you know, enumerate their experiences, and it's always been very much focused on our own, the work that we're doing. So it's probably isn't representative of you know, the cross section of views that you would hear, you know, if you just approach the subject more generally.
Yeah, thanks. And Martin Gibson asks, do you think we need legislation that enables easier trialing of new things?
Oh, good question. Yeah, I mean, possibly we need processes that make it easier to trial new things. And one of the difficulties that I see perhaps in the UK system is that there's almost no framework or system for trialing new things. You know, so you can find yourself on a conference call with the Department for Transport, Active Travel England, and various public sector bodies. You know, and you can reach the end of that call and still not be entirely clear in terms of what the process is. And then if a local authority wants to then try something new, you know, there are questions of liability, you know, and some local authorities can be very cautious. So actually getting people over the line to try something can be quite difficult. You know, but that's not just, you know, I think that the highway is a very regulated place for good reason. You know, but maybe we do need a more formal process for doing this, not just in England, but in Scotland and Wales as well. You know, I quite like the way that the Irish do things. You know, they've got their own regulatory issues as well. But I think one of the big differences possibly is that they, you know, you know, they're not as convinced that they know what they're doing as the English always are, and they take influences from a much wider range of places, and you see that on street. They take things from North America, they take things from Europe, they take things from the UK as well. So kind of having this quite open mentality is something that I think they perhaps have got that we haven't, just for historical reasons as much as anything.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And I think there's a sort of few questions around, again, this sort of, do we need this? And I think Mark probably sums it up by saying, are we at risk of trying to apply a motor traffic solution to a human interaction and behavioural issue? So, I'm not going to read all of those questions, because I think you've kind of covered this already. But if you want to pick up on, I think it's that sort of, yeah, I guess it's applying motor traffic solutions to walking and cycling, and, you know.
Yeah, that's it. And I think, you know, from a personal point of view, I would say that, you know, using traffic signals to solve this problem is an awful way of doing it. And that is exactly what has just been described there, you know, using motor traffic solutions on a cycleway. You know, but the difficulty in a way, and also there's lots and lots of places which have very low cycling volumes. You know, so implementing some, you know, expensive cyclist detection system when there's only 100 cyclists a day to start with would be incredibly difficult to justify. And also there's lots of locations where no one who is visually impaired is reporting a problem. You know, so maybe, I suppose I come at this very much from the situation of where, you know, it's good to have a bank of solutions here that we can offer, when someone is actually saying, I've genuinely got a problem here. You know, I need to get from this bus stop to this place. I'm finding this really difficult. You know, what can you do to help me? The zebra crossing doesn't cut it. And at the moment, the only solution out there is a full-on pedestrian crossing, which would be bad news. So, you know, I think I'm arguing maybe we need a range of solutions that kind of sit in the middle. You know, and we can all debate what might be appropriate where, but at the moment there's just nothing much available.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I'm going to read this one final question, I think, and then we'll close because we're getting close to 6:15 now. But Wookie says Cambridge did a study a few years ago where they videoed people over a week, and it was analysed on Hills Road, where there were some concerns from visually impaired users, and he wondered whether you'd seen that. And I guess, I mean, that's a kind of broader question. You know, are there many of these studies?
That's it. I suppose no, I've not seen that individual one. You know, and I suppose in the past, lots of people commission studies, but then the data goes no further than their own municipality. You know, so there's not some central bank of research where everyone's pulled all of this together. You know, so I mean, I'll quite happily go and Google Cambridge once I'm done here. But no, I wasn't aware of that one.
Oh, right. Some have to see if there's some more reading for you.
Oh yeah.
Thank you very much, Tom. That was really, really interesting. And you know, some kind of good questions around that, and we'll follow that with interest to see what happens. So please come back again if you make some progress with it. And do you want to stop sharing now? I should have said that right at the beginning. And if you could share your slides with us, Tom, by email, then we can put those on the website.
Will do.
Thanks to everybody for joining us this evening. Next week we have John Parkin, who's here tonight, I think, who is going to talk about educating engineers, reflecting on his career in educating engineers. So join us at 5 next week, and hope you all have a good week.